In this short session, I want to talk with you about the language of outcomes. So, in the years that I've worked in the sport and physical activity space, we've moved a great distance in how we describe our activities and projects and how we communicate about the difference that we make. But we still have some work to do. Outcomes are really important for you to define within a project or an activity for a number of reasons. From a really practical point of view, outcomes is the language that funders use. So funders are expecting you to outline outcomes in funding applications, and they're expecting you to report back on those as well when you're successful with funding. For me, they're very much about helping us focus on success, what success will look like when we've made the difference that we want to make for people and communities. And this can be very helpful when we want to engage with partners or even people within our own organisation or our team to help people connect up the things we do with the difference that we're trying to make, which is really important for people to be able to understand their role within that and for them to be able to connect with the idea of the project or the activity that you're involved with. So outcomes are really important for that. They're also a very important element of how we evaluate. So we need to be able to be clear about our outcomes at the beginning of a project or program so that we're able to measure change, understand our impact, and be able to learn what's worked and what hasn't, and to be able to report on that. Today, I want to take you through a very simple approach to developing outcomes. And you could even do this for yourself at the end of this video. And it's a method that I've used routinely in workshops or with groups of people, or also on a one-to-one basis with projects and people that are designing new programs. And I hope it's a helpful way for you to try and define the outcomes for your activity or service. I'm going to start by talking about what an outcome is. So an outcome is a change or a result that you're working to bring about, and it's usually for people or communities. So it's about the impact, it's about the difference made, it's about what success will look like. So I wanted to take you through this simple method to identify or define outcomes for your project or your programme. In this example, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a need you've identified or a problem that you want to try and solve through your project or your program or your new idea. And then we're going to flip that and make it into a positive statement, which becomes our outcome. So we're taking the problem or the need and we're then defining what success would look like. So I've got two examples to show you here today, and hopefully then you can connect up and think about some for your own work. So in this one, we've got a problem, which is older people are socially isolated. So you can see within that, I'm setting out the target group for the activity, and I'm also identifying the specific challenge or issue that we think there is for that group. And then for this one, the outcome might look something like this. Older people feel more connected with others. So again, we've got the target group in there, but we're explaining what the change will be for people when we've delivered our activity successfully. I'm going to show you one other example. So the problem here is we have a large dropout rate for girls after the age of 13 in our group or our session. And for this one, the outcome might be girls sustain their engagement in our group at the same rate as boys. So again, really simple tool. You can use it with others, use it, setting out lots of needs, lots of problems, picking a few out to define some outcomes around, and then create some statements like this for your own area of work. There's two more things I wanted to cover off in the session. The first is I wanted to talk with you a little bit about the difference between outputs and outcomes. So this is one of the biggest challenges that we have in this space. People often get these two muddled. So I wanted to explain to you the difference between the two and what that might look like in terms of how we report, because often it's in the reporting stage that we see that people have got these two things mixed up. So I want you to try and think about outputs as being the direct product of an activity. I'm going to show you an example in a minute. And outcomes about being the statement around what success would look like. Okay, So if you were setting out some outcomes, you're reporting back on what you've done, and you were putting in statements like these are actually output statements. So if you tell me that you've delivered 25 sessions or 3 events or whatever that might be, or if you describe the number of people you've engaged, those are much more outcome statements. So they're saying, we delivered what we said we would, and this was the direct product. But neither of these things tell us at all if we brought about the change we wanted to bring about. So if you went back to that older people example, this would show that we had done what we said we would do, we delivered our sessions and so on, but it doesn't tell us if their social isolation has changed at all in the older people example. So if we were reporting back around outcomes, it would look something more like this. So in this example, I'm looking at an activity that might encourage people to become more involved around physical activity. So here you might report something like, it could still be quantitative, so it could still be number-based, but it would look something more like this if it was about an outcome. So 73% of people reported increased motivation to engage in physical activity. Or to go back to the older people's example, you might have something like 91% of older people reported feeling more connected with others. Those are the sorts of examples. And when we report on outcomes, we can also look at more qualitative evidence of that as well. So there you might have some examples. So in this one, young people shared examples of sports they have participated in. So you're showing that the change has actually taken place. So I hope that's helpful around outputs and outcomes. Both have a role, but it's really important not to jumble the two up when we report back on outcomes. Finally, I just wanted to give you some tips around how to strengthen your own approach to using outcomes. So some people watching this video will be starting with a fresh idea and you're trying to scope that out and define it, maybe for an application, maybe for a discussion with someone else. Or you might already have a set of outcomes and maybe a number of different plans or strategies that have evolved over time that you want to take a fresh look at. So there's 3 things that I would encourage you to try and do at whatever stage you are with outcomes. The first is to ask yourself, are your outcomes specific enough? The best outcomes are really sharp and really clear, and they're not too fuzzy, so they don't leave too much doubt about what you're actually focusing on. So I would suggest that you try and be really clear in your outcome about at least your target group and the focus of change. So again, you could go back to that earlier slide and have a look at the examples I gave around that. The second thing I would ask you to look at is, do you have too many? This is probably one of the commonest mistakes that I see with people who are either submitting funding applications or who are reporting back on funding. They've got so many outcomes that we get a little bit lost around the difference they've made. My advice would be to try and focus on 3 to 5 really solid outcomes that are the core focus of what you do. We completely understand that you may deliver other outcomes, some of which might be unexpected. It's great to kind of gather those in some way, but it's really about trying to focus and elevate those ones that are the main focus. 3 to 5 is absolutely perfect. I know that can feel difficult to people because sometimes you want to try and demonstrate the huge impact that you're having, but it actually gets lost when we have too many. And the third thing I wanted you to think about is, perhaps as well, if you feel you're quite strong around outcomes, is to think about how you're using them. So we have a separate video about evaluation, and that's an important part of using outcomes. But they are also a really important way to communicate the role of your project or program. So being able to map your outcomes to local plans, to what partners talk about as their outcomes, being able to communicate them to people when you're at events or sessions. You can use outcomes in lots of different ways to explain that role that you have with people and communities. Evaluation, as I've mentioned. And I want you to think about that part, not just be about reporting for accountability reasons, but also to use outcomes to consider the learning that you're gathering from your project or your program. So really trying to reflect on whether you are still aligned with those outcomes that you started with, and what you're learning about what works and what doesn't. So what we're learning about having the biggest impact we possibly can. I hope that's been helpful for you, and wish you lots of luck with working with outcomes more effectively.